Good afternoon, Austin. I hope everyone is enjoying the unseasonably nice warm weather that have been having lately. Unfortunately, it's also allergy season, so it makes it a little challenging for some of us to want to get out and do as much as we should with this nice weather. But today I get to be inside and I get to do some podcast stuff, so that's always good. And I'm joined today by the Friebertshauser. I believe I only butchered that a little bit. From Homads. How's it going today?
Great. Thanks for having me, Troy.
No, I really appreciate it. Why don't you I always generally kind of like to start off with a little bit of origin story about you and Homads.
Yeah, for sure. So I started Homads with a couple of other people. Maybe it was 2016 when we first launched, so it's quite a while, right? Did not
Really,
have the
it's really
technical
not that
background.
long ago, but in startup world, it feels like forever ago.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I was in my late 20s then, so it was a interesting discovery period within that time too. So it seemed like a decade ago, which I guess we're getting close to that too. You round up, but started it when it was at the advent of home sharing, house hacking, that sort of stuff is really new. And I, being the introvert myself, was thinking, hey, you know what? I really don't want to talk to someone every couple of days and have like shallow conversations. I want to have someone stay longer, but I also don't want an annual lease and commit to that. And it really just came from that. And that's how we fell into the midterm rental side of things. So HomeAds is essentially a booking site for medium term rentals. And so midterm rentals pretty much means anything that is past 30 days and then less than an annual lease. So it's the mid part. So we trucked along doing that for the last several years and did not truly understand really how long it would take for people to pick up what they have now recently picked up with understanding remote work and being able to work anywhere and live anywhere. And so that's essentially how we got started initially. I can go into more details. It kind of just depends on which direction we want to go on it.
I'm up for any directions. It's interesting you mentioned how I think for a lot of people, if they're starting a business, especially a kind of a startup type of thing, how it really initially a lot of times is a need they're them trying to fulfill a need that they have. So it's
Hmm.
interesting that part of your journey as well, that it was like, oh, hey, this seems interesting, but there's nothing out there that really covers this space right now. And I think it's cool. It's a way to scratch the itch of trying to fix your own thing, but it's also an interesting way to come up with ideas. I hear a lot of people that, well, I want to start something, but I don't know
Yeah.
what's something you wish was different or better or just changed in the world or in your life, and go with that, because it also, I'm sure, having that passion for that specific problem has also, I'm sure, helped you pursue it potentially longer than you would have some other project that you
Yeah.
didn't have that passion for.
Yeah, I definitely see it from both sides now. When I first started, I always thought people were crazy when they'd tell me, like, I want to do something, but I don't have what I want. I don't know what problem to solve. Right. And I was just thinking, that is the craziest thing. Like, why would you want to do this? But then I see it now, having done it like several years and then also other smaller things on the side. And then it's coming from the other perspective. I had a mentor, tell me one time, I think he was at YC, and he said there are two companies. One that was like just there every day, working their asses off, all this stuff. And then another one that was just kind of like party and doing whatever. And I really cared too much, but made it enough to get to YC, obviously. And it was crazy within the duration that he was there. He said the company that actually wasn't busting their ass was like it was so easy for them to make money, and it was really just timing and market, right? And that you can work so hard, but if you do not find the right company really that fits that product market fit kind of mentality, it is going to be so difficult. And so his mentality was choose an easy company. There are easy ones and there are hard ones. And I totally get it now. When I look at it, I'm like, oh, you know what? What if I were to start something? What would I start? And the opportunity of where we are today, and then working backwards to it, is a lot easier for me to perceive than when I first started. It was just like oh, you know what? No one's doing this small niche, and I could do that. I didn't think about any of the business side of it until much later.
Yeah. That's an interesting. I can't think of the specific quote, but I'm sure there's a quote out there about success being opportunity plus like invention or something like that, right? There's a lot of things in life that growth isn't a linear process. And
Yeah.
so whether it's startups, honestly, whether it's financial investments like the stock market and different things, right? I'm a realtor, so in the housing market, right? You
Yeah.
trying to time markets, trying to time the perfect time to do a startup, the perfect time to buy a house, the perfect time to get into stocks generally doesn't work because over the course of a year or a decade, there are literally these moments of when something really takes off. And were you prepared and ready to take advantage of that opportunity? Or
Yeah.
were you waiting to find the right time to jump in? And then by the time you jump in, it's too late. And so the same thing there, like by being having been prepared over a number of years to suddenly this the COVID and COVID hit and people are like we still want to get out, so these short-term rentals are a huge thing now, is an opportunity that you were never going to be able to predict would happen to accelerated business growth.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I notice with other entrepreneurs that I see now in hindsight too is I think it is a misconstrued uh, perception that you have to work full time on something. And that means, I think what it is, investors see, hey, a KPI of successful startups are ones that are working full time. And that's because they had so much traction that they had to quit their full time job and go here. And then somewhere there's a miscommunication, and it then is indicated to founders, or they think in their heads, hey, if I quit my job, it'll indicate to an investor that I'm investable, right? And that's not how that should go. What really is interesting is I see a lot of founders who are just have a couple of things or like full time one thing and then just have 10% on something and let it sit. And it's maybe they're not talking about it and maybe they built it and just let it sat and then looked at the numbers and that traction will tell them. And that was very interesting to me because it was the having the experience to know when to put down the gas and then when to let off is I just really went in and thought, hey, I got to commit to this. I want to put 110% on home ads. And if I got 5, 10 rejections, that means I'll just send in like another 100 and get another 100 rejections or read the market and know when to let off and then utilize your time somewhere else.
I'm
I guess
sure.
that's the experience part.
Yeah, well, I was saying, I'm sure as a first time founder, like that's one of those things that you wouldn't. Again, you don't. A lot of times in life, you don't know what you don't know, right? You don't
Yeah.
know that there are different ways to go about it. You just hear again mostly the huge, large success stories, and so a lot of those are someone that just does it full time because either they can, they have
Yeah.
again in a lot of cases, especially the Silicon Valley ones, they have a network of people or family money to where it's great.
Yeah.
We'll get you the startup and you can live off of this for a little while to jump right
Yeah.
in. So that's a different concept. The nice thing about potentially keeping your full-time job and growing it slower is you can bootstrap it obviously a little bit better that way as well, which again I think doesn't get as much attention because it's not
Mm-mm.
as splashy headline wise and things. But in reality, one of the things that I, again, in my learnings with the Austin startup community too, you think, oh, great, I raised a bunch of money. But also, what that means is you sold off some of your company, some of your control. And so, as great as it is to raise money and that you need to have cash flow to keep the business going, at the same point in time, like giving up control earlier and earlier or more of it is definitely not something that most founders initially, especially first time founders, really want to do. Like it's their baby. And now if you suddenly have all these other people that are telling you, hey, we need to see results, we need to see this, like that
Yeah.
can, I'm sure, lead to a lot of less than enjoyable experiences.
Yeah, initially I was worried about control whenever it was raising money. And then after and we mostly bootstrap and we raise mostly from angel investors if we raise anything, but no institutional funding. And the thing that I realized after COVID is so I talked to pretty much every direct competitor of Homads. Essentially, I was trying to sell off Homads, right? I was like, I'm done. I'm gonna get
Yeah.
my hand, just take our supply, do whatever. And I realized they were all failing, and they were failing way worse than us typically is because they took institutional money. And why I mean they're failing is because it works really well is if the market and everything goes the way that you want it to go. But it's one of those things of fail fast
Mhm.
situation too, is if the market and it's not going well, most investors do want you to fail fast So then there's less maintenance, less of everything. But from a founder's perspective, it's also, hey, I just hired however many people full time. You can't be like, hey, you know what? Can you work less hours? That's what we had to do. Or, hey, you know what? You're still at your full time job. I don't have to worry about your mortgage. You don't get extra money, but let's just not build anything for right now. We could do that, right? Versus institutional, like people who have institutional money, it is a, hey, you're going to have to fire people and it's a massive deal, or lay off people or whatever it is. And so I think they ended much fast just because it's that speed, right? It's either go really far
Yeah.
or stop very quickly.
That, and then the VCs want you to put that money to use too. It's not,
Yeah.
hey, I like this is growing slower. Maybe people, the angel investors can maybe see the idea and be like, great, this might work down the road. Where VCs are like, no, we want it to work a lot faster. So it's not, hey,
Yeah.
get this money and have this as a rainy day fund or cash flow when times are tough fund. It's a, hey, take our money, put it to use to get things, to put it as the jet fuel for the rocket engine to get things really going. And so they want you to burn through it quickly, which again isn't always the best situation.
Yeah, it makes sense if it's the, hey, we have product market fit, and let's say it's a consumer product, it's going to cost this. If the due diligence and all of that lines up, yes, it makes sense to take that money. But the earlier the stage, the less likely those things are really going to happen. And we're early, right? Like, for instance, now we're just seeing the midterm rental market take off, and certain industries that weren't open to us are now wide open. Right. And so we're like, huh, this is crazy. And we never would have even gone this route had we actually taken money, because we would have said, oh, we're doing relocation or whatever it is that we said we were doing. And then we can't just go back and like change our minds. We're totally going to pivot and do a more B2B, just cut off the consumers. Like those are massive decisions to make, that if the more stakeholders you have, the harder it is to do. And then there's also, it's a preference thing too, right? Is I met another founder. He's a good friend of mine, and I think he raised like 30 million or something so far. And he was like, I was talking about what did I want to do? Did I want to try to sell off Homads? Did I want to shut it down? And he was just so envious of me. And I was like, what are you talking about? He was like, you have a choice. I would love, like, the grass is always greener, but he would love to just be like, what do I want to do next? Versus he took the checks and this is what he's doing for the next however many years.
Yes, you mentioned that Homads was your first venture into the startup world. What were you doing prior to starting it up and going that route?
So I was all media. I actually had worked in nonprofit. So I have a background in sociology and also film, mostly documentary side, right? And worked in nonprofit, worked in disaster recovery, all of this stuff. And they mostly utilized me for my media, because most nonprofits do not have media budgets, right? And then got more into mainstream media, was connecting a lot of Asian American with mainstream media. So let's say working with ARP, right? Elderly care is a big deal for Asian communities. And so getting that media connection there. Or I worked with Walmart commercials, and it was awesome because I got to learn a lot, but it was also soul sucking because it's just like 30-second commercials, creativity is sucked out of you.
Yeah.
I was very much in the media side. And so it wasn't very difficult in terms of, most people say tech is like male dominated. Asian media, oh man, totally different world. So I would say it wasn't that difficult to transition over. The harder part of transitioning into tech was the technical part, right? Is understanding how it works. How do I work well with the development team while I provide the business side, that sort of stuff.
Nice. And then, are you originally from the Austin area at all? Or I know it seems like most people, it's rare that I get to interview someone that is originally from Austin, but are you from here, from California?
So I came here.
California?
I came here in '05, so that would date me age-wise, but I came here for college.
Okay.
But born and raised Texan, so it's not like a far.
Not the dreaded California, which is,
Yeah.
they say it's one of the easy jokes to make, especially as a real estate agent, is about more Californians keep coming. But in reality,
My husband is from Sonoma. I joke with him all the
yeah,
time.
well, and California is the state that has the most out-of-staters coming to
Yeah.
Texas, but there's, for Austin specifically, and even I'm sure the other cities too, there's way more intrastate migration that ends up happening,
Exactly.
especially
Yeah.
the small towns to the bigger cities has been a thing
Yeah.
for 20, 30 years in America, if not more. And as much as we like to give the Californians a hard time, they're easy targets, it's definitely not that wouldn't be the sole reason to have growth slow down if they stop coming by any means.
For sure. Yeah, we actually saw a lot of that with Homads too prior to COVID, was just a lot of interstate moving.
I will say I felt as a realtor, and I don't know if you necessarily know one way or the other too, but that with COVID, it actually, I felt like we got more people from a lot of different other areas. Like I felt like we had a lot more Northeasterners coming to
Mhm.
Texas, where I felt like before, and plenty of them still went down to Florida as well. But I feel like that was their more kind of direct pipeline from the cold to the warm, or from the expensive
Yeah.
to the less expensive, was going New York to
Yep.
Florida.
Yep.
And where for us it was a lot of West Coasters to Texas or Idaho or Arizona. And it felt like with COVID that there was more everyone kind of going everywhere. There was
Yep.
partially, I'm sure, because there wasn't maybe the specific job need
Yep.
with some of those,
Yeah.
obviously, like from Silicon Valley to the Austin area, and kind of
Mhm.
work anywhere. But that was
Yeah.
an interesting thing to me, is just how many more people that it felt like I was dealing with that were from New Jersey or from Connecticut or from Ohio.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you pose the question prior to COVID of if you could live anywhere, think of
Mhm.
housing, think of your surroundings, your neighborhood, where would you want to live? That question, most people would just feel like, oh, that's impossible because of this, right? And now it's, oh, that's not impossible and I can do all of this. And that was actually why I really started Homads too, was because I was doing video editing, right? So I had managed a lot of editors at the time. So I would just have a hard drive with 12 different projects from all these different editors, and I would have to go in and approve and give comments. And all I needed was a laptop and a hard drive.
Mhm.
And so I remember I backpacked Europe, like Western Europe, for 3 months. And like being in a hostel in Istanbul and sending back edits and being like, oh, I'm getting paid. I'm sitting out here doing whatever and eating pretty much my way through Europe. And I was just thinking, imagine if everyone could do that, right?
Sure.
And that was a hope. But of course, I'm not sure if it was talking to you previously, but the cost of changing consumer behavior is just so expensive. And that was just something that in my naivety of starting a startup back then, was I did not fully understand that until now.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously at that, I'm sure it was obviously at a younger age, but there's obviously a lot of different factors for why people decide where they live and if they'd want to move and all those kind of things as well too. And so being younger, probably single at the time, and having a job that has that
That's true.
flexibility
Yeah.
makes it generally significantly easier as people. For myself, again, not being originally from Texas, like I have family all over the country, so like it wouldn't be mentally, it's not that hard of a leap to be like, oh, I could move around to different places and work. But for a lot of people,
Yeah.
most people end up living within a relatively small radius of where they were born, and it's obviously less and less. But so there's just a lot of potentially family, a lot of their network of people, and then again,
Yeah.
obviously jobs as well too. Now more and more jobs seem to be going, or not seem to, more and more jobs are being able to be done remotely. It's interesting
Mhm.
to see how companies will continue to do that, because obviously a lot of the larger companies, Apples, the Googles, Amazons, and stuff, have at least hinted, if not started to push back on fully remote
Yeah.
workers. And so that'll be an interesting push and pull between what really happens there.
Yeah.
Right now, most stuff is still on the side of the workers, just because there's generally not enough high skilled workers for a lot of those jobs. But when you hear of Amazon laying off 8,000 or 18,000 people and Facebook laying off 12,000 people,
Yeah.
it's going to put a little bit more power in the corporation's courts to say, hey, guess what? We're not going to let you off, but we do require you to come back into the office.
Yeah. Yeah, we know that some companies were trying to get creative where it was, hey, they're not doing so hot with remote work and they just want the face to face. I think some hybrid is
Mhm.
where they said, hey, what can I get for the summertime a month for our marketing team to come together in a specific location, right? And so like people are trying to get creative with the hybrid mentality of it. I think it allows a lot more, meaning a lot more flexibility if you're, let's say, a worker where you can work remotely, but then your needs to go in office are a lot less. And then you reverse that too is from a founder standpoint, fundraising was always it, unless you do consumer product goods or like enterprise sales type of stuff in Texas, like most people don't get what you do. And
Sure.
so you either have to go out to New York City or San Francisco. And for me, it was San Francisco because they are more consumer based, had a lot more wins for consumer exits, that sort of stuff. And that is a very costly thing to do is build a relationship there if you do not live there.
Sure.
Because prior to COVID, people wouldn't take a video call. It was weird. And a phone call is a little impersonal versus a video call is like that in between.
So, yeah,
And
you
so
get some of that
now
nonverbal communication.
exactly. And so it was like a hit or miss because like fundraising is almost like dating, where it's just obviously like dating, there's a checklist of things you want, but a lot of it is dynamic. Like, do you trust this person? All this stuff. And how do you eh, date someone, right? From afar, right? You
Yeah.
get one interaction and you got to go fly out to that place. Imagine if you had a date and you had to fly out to see them on the first date, right? And it's like a at best 50-50 chance, like
Sure.
it's an expensive thing to do. And so now with it going remote, it's actually quite nice is you can get those introductory meetings and be like, is there chemistry to like go do this in person?
Yeah.
And we're seeing that a lot more and more in like in different transactions.
No, for sure. It's a we as unfortunate as COVID and all the lockdowns and stuff have been,
Yeah.
it was like the timing of when it happened couldn't have been better. I'm sure somewhere down the road in the future, it'll would have been even better because of some other technology. But like that's happened
Yeah.
20 years ago when we didn't have any possibility of video conferencing and you were stuck at home, like and actually had to lose your job because you could only
Yeah.
work at a computer that was plugged into the hardwired system in an office somewhere. And then say to not be able to not have be able to have these types of connections. And obviously the in-person connect you they still don't replace the in-person connections, but you
Yeah.
can build there's a lot of trust and camaraderie that you can build through virtual connections and virtual relationships that can help you when you do get into person stuff that can make it a lot better. I'm sure it can make on the fun and fundraising when it is like you say like dating and it's relatively serious. It's obviously they're important meetings and stuff that way. So it's one of those where I'm sure it's nice to have a little groundwork laid versus going in cold.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So what other than having the idea for home ads, was there ever really a point in time much before that that you thought, "Hey, I want to go into business for myself, start my own business." It sounded like you were maybe ready to get out of the media space at least as it dealt with the 30-second commercial spot. But growing up, were you very entrepreneurial minded? Was that something you had always kind of looked to do, expected to do, wanted to do?
Yeah, so prior to Homads, I actually ran a production company with another co-founder too. So I've always, I think it's because my mom started her own store. So she used to, so very Vietnamese of us, but she would do sewing for all these companies, right? She would sew clothes. And she then started her own alterations and dry cleaning service and her own store. I remember putting flyers out on cars, all this stuff when we were like a young kid, sleeping on I don't know how familiar people are about dry cleaners, but you throw these clothes in these like bags, right? And it's, oh, you want light starch, medium starch, whatever. And we are like young, and my mom would have to go to the post office and she'd be like, hey, I'm gonna take you to work. And obviously it's like a weekend, right?
Yeah.
Take you to work and I need to run some errands while you're there. And there's like less people in the morning. So we're just like passed out, falling asleep on those like bags. And then the customer would come in, we'd pop up, they're like, hi, how are you doing? And get them their stuff. And so I saw my mom build her business. She actually ended up selling her business a couple years ago and she was voted top seamstress for North Texas. So she's done quite well.
That's awesome.
But for me, it was just I never thought it was entrepreneurial. It actually took me probably several years of being in home ads when people will continually ask you, "Were you entrepreneurial?" And I would say, I don't know. I kind of thought it was more of, oh, you have a like a CEO dad, and at the dinner table, you're talking about like mergers and acquisitions or something. I don't know. And so I didn't really think about it in that way. And then I thought about it. And I was like, oh, I have done stuff ever since I was like kid, like I would write letters to our principal and he was so sweet. He would exchange it with, I don't know, a third grader or something, right? And then eventually I was like, man, my family would always take aluminum cans to go recycle and go with my dad and get a couple of dollars. And I was like, I asked my principal, I was like, hey, can I take the schools? And so I just took bags and bags of recycle. I got a couple of bucks to buy some candy or something. It wasn't like a need or anything, but it was seeing waste
But
that I could have,
seeing an
yeah,
opportunity that was there and then taking advantage of it for sure. Yeah, no,
exactly.
it's again going back to the you don't know what you don't know. You don't realize most people don't realize that how they're raised. Not that they don't realize it now, but like when you're being raised, when you're a kid,
Yeah,
it's just life, right? It's not
yeah,
entrepreneurial life or kid life or working the 9 to 5 life. It's just life is going to my mom's small
yeah.
business and seeing that. But obviously, all those things have when you're young, obviously psychology shows that has a big impression on you, and so seeing that
Mhm.
definitely I'm sure has helped you at least I'm sure have some additional belief in yourself that yeah we can make my own business. That's something people do versus other people who are like the thought of creating their own business or leaving their 9 to 5 would be so scary that they would never want to take the jump.
Yeah, I remember when I did freelance work, and it was at least nice because it wasn't like a 9 to 5 and I went straight to start my own business. It was like 9 to 5 freelancing for a long time and then business. So it was like baby steps, but even freelancing can be really terrifying going from a 9 to 5. And my sister is a photographer, freelance all the time with newspapers. And then so is my mom, and my sister already had influence on me. And I remember asking her, like, hey, how do you like deal with the stress of this? And she said, you're going to have your heart attacks. You're always going to have your heart attacks. So can I pay my bills? Can I do whatever? But eventually you realize, oh, okay, the last time I had my heart attack about not having enough money, I busted ass to get more gigs. And then it always happened. I always paid the bills. And at some point, you change how you think about that stress. Instead of it becoming a, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to pay my bills, it's the, okay, V, it's time to get your ass up and you
Yeah,
need to go get some gigs and you're like, work harder.
to step it up a notch.
Exactly.
What do you see? You mentioned that you've obviously changed what the focus is for Homads over the last six plus years that you've had the company. What kind of what things do you hopefully have on the horizon to continue with the growth for the company?
So it's interesting because market timing, right? Back then, the hardest thing for us to get were hosts to come to our site because it's a two-sided marketplace. So you need people with houses and you need people who want to rent them, right? And for us, it was, oh, okay, Airbnb was lots of money coming in, not that many hosts in the short-term rental or STR market, right? And so no one wanted to budge. They're like, why would I mess up a great thing? And then COVID hits, and that was like a hiccup. One hiccup isn't really going to change the market, even if it's COVID, right? It's more of a combination of things and it sustaining the bad is sustained. And so a recession in COVID, and also the fact that so many hosts are getting into the market. 2022, we had a ton of market or a ton of money in the market. And so a lot of businesses opened up, a lot smaller management companies, smaller mom and pop type of properties get into STR. And so now you're diluting all the other hosts there. And then you look at booking.com, VRBO, all those people that also had this massive marketing budget, they are less. So that gets diluted out with a whole bunch of different people too. And so all the players who used to get their listing advertised is not getting advertised. So everything is a little bit less there. And people are starting to shift more into diversifying their portfolio, which means having a conversation with a host. Like I remember we went door to door knocking on, like we would look at on public record to try to find what houses are for lease. We were trying to think who would use us, right? And we would knock on people's doors and have angry people yell at us. And when we got one host, we were so excited. We were so excited because we are like, oh my God, they would use us. Now it was like, oh, message them on Facebook or someone hears about you and then you got so many bookings or so many listings on your site. But then it's the, oh, okay, it's a marketplace. That's great if you have a whole bunch of listings. You can't get it booked, then it's nothing. So then we said, hey, let's push on the other side. And insurance is a really common thing. Traveling nurses is another common one. There is already a competitor, Furnish Finder, does a lot when it comes to the medical side. So we said, you know, let's not go that route. And there's a lot of smaller ones doing that too. And so we said, let's go towards insurance. Let's talk to them. And oh my God, they were very open to talking to us because they had already utilized Airbnb and they're like, we are not happy with this, or VRBO or whatever it is, the short term rental platforms. And they said, we don't like it for these specific reasons. Can you build this? And we're like, yes, we will build anything. And so we built it for them. And now that's what we're doing is we're doing our walkthroughs and it's interesting because insurance is not very sexy. It's not interesting, but there's a lot of money there and it is something that recurs constantly, unfortunately, but it does, right? Because it's fires, floods, that sort of stuff. And so that's the direction we're going. And to go back on what we were talking about on the DC side is if I had taken money, we would have done relocation all day, every day. And we were talking to large corporations, HR, relocation specialists, and we just couldn't budge. We never really thought we worked with insurance, but they already said no. And how we spent all that money, we would have just said, hey, the market doesn't exist. Versus now we can be like, oh, hey, the market's growing and we're allowed to do this because no one's pushing us. Our angel investors, of course, they want this to grow, but they also invested in us, right? Not necessarily, it's a gamble in some ways. So it's a little easier for us, but of course, our hope is to be able to grow. And if it goes well, then we actually may just pivot only to the insurance side, but it's startups, so you never know.
With insurance, is it tricky at all? So is it primarily like big event, like bigger catastrophe events, or is it just the one-off types of things, again, of water pipe leaking, you're going to need to spend a couple months of getting your house repaired for that fire, those kind of things more, so it's more one-offs? Because I would think like if it was more larger events, again, hurricanes in Florida or tornadoes somewhere, that would be a little bit trickier to do that, just because the spot that needs the housing probably would change all the time, because most people aren't probably going to move from Oklahoma to Austin for the 6 months that their house gets rebuilt. And like it's hard to have specific hosts. Like, we need mobile hosts that can go to all these different places. So it's probably
that was actually what we tried doing back then. Was there, I forgot what it was. I think it was flooding or something. And we're like, hey, we can help. And we realized, oh wait, everyone around you is also flooded. Like, you're going to have to move significantly further than where you want to be. Versus here, yes, one of the ideal situations for insurance is to be able to look at an address and be like, hey, what are all the addresses of the listings we have access to? And then they can run like comps on it, right? You can't do that with a short-term rental site because everything is made sure that, hey, you cannot get address. It's the safety of it, but it's also because they run as a consumer platform. Sure. If we transition, it is, hey, we partner directly with the insurance company so that they can have that access, but it's also just making sure that they get everything they need, but at the same time, the host win-win situation, basically.
Sure. They have the security that not everyone in the world knows.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. No, I say that's an interesting market that I wouldn't necessarily have considered either right off. It makes a lot of sense, but it's, again, not something that it's not, unless you're in the insurance world, it's probably not something that
it's not something where you're like, I want to start something, I'm going to start this, that. It doesn't come about in that situation. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So what are some ways that people can find out more about you and the company?
So right now we are running the beta with the insurance company. So we're keeping our hosts updated. We actually have a site. If you go down, or a landing page, if you go down on the bottom of our footer, there's a preferred host program, and that's a good way to apply with us. And then from there, we've kept some of it where the hosts are updated on like a Facebook group. So it's like very hands-on, high touch, because it is one of those things of, hey, we'll build if we see a need, but we won't know if there's a need unless we're talking to you. So it is a very like high touch situation now. Sure. Even with the insurance company, they're like, hey, you don't have to have the payment set out. We'll send you a check. And so it really is the early stages. Again, it's weird because we've been alive and working for so long, but it's the early stages.
Yeah, again, it is taking a step back, but it's the right step back. But it is like, I'm sure it does feel starting over, which again, it
beginning again. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But with all the knowledge that you've had over the last few years and a market, and hopefully at least some of the insights to product market fit that you didn't have initially as well.
Yeah, it's knowledge, and it's also access. right, is coming from media, I really didn't know a lot of people. And that's why accelerators exist. That's why all these things is oftentimes it really is a common quote or saying is your network, or your network is your network. So essentially, who you know really makes things go so much faster.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that it's funny because a lot of people will tell me, "Oh, introduce them to someone I know," or we'll have something working, and they'll say, "Oh my gosh, how did you meet him or her?" And I'd say, "Oh, they rejected me for investment years ago, but then they still got to know me." And that is the benefit of actually going down that route of like actually fundraising and things like that, is I got to know a lot of great people and built my network of people.
Nice. No, like I say, it's as much as the world, going back to the whole Zoom type of stuff, as much as the world
Mhm.
becomes more and more digital and online and stuff, the relationships that you have with people really still have an outsized impact on life and success as well too.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely helpful too, is because when you're around for this long, I'm not sure if you've read Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, I believe it's called. And it's about people who give, people who take, and people who match, meaning I give you something, you match me and give me something back. And I used to get so frustrated because I tended to be a giver, right? And I would see people who, especially on the startup side of things, who would make their numbers or pitch really gregarious. And I would just think, oh my God, they're getting investment and it's fake. But I'm doing it right. We have decent profit margin, we have revenue, all this stuff, and I just don't get it. And I think that's what it means too in this situation is, yeah, they rejected me, but the people that, let's say, weren't so great that got investment died off a long time ago and they never came back because you can't. Sometimes you just got to start from the bottom and build your reputation. And if that means a lot of rejections, a lot of hard work without a lot of help, you build that network and you build your relationship and reputation. And
You can't, like I say, I mean, your reputation is hard to build and easy to break, but it's doing the right thing is always the right thing. It's just sometimes in the very micro moments, it doesn't always feel
it,
that way.
exactly,
It really does make a difference long term.
for sure, for
I
sure.
appreciate you taking the time to jump on and do the podcast with me. Hopefully you get
Of
to
course.
maybe get outside and enjoy a little bit of the sunshine, or at least you're working in an office where you can have some of the sunshine and make it seem good.
Yeah, hopefully the allergies don't count. I've been dying from
Yeah.
allergies as well, so
Unfortunately, I have definitely avoided some opportunities to do things outside because I was like, I just know that it's going to be one of those 12 or 24 hours where you're just going to be out of it and a little, maybe not miserable, but like you're just not going
yeah.
to feel as good and not going to be as productive. And so I was like,
Mhm.
as much as there's a little part of
Yeah.
me that it pains to say, nah, I don't think I'm going to do that. I know that it's been probably the right call. And again, the right thing was the right thing. And so it's the right
Yeah.
thing to do,
Yeah,
even
I
though
made that
it feels,
mistake a couple of days ago, and I'm barely recovering from it
yeah.
now, and that's why I'm like, "I'm gonna stay indoors."
You're like, "I'm gonna stay inside. I've been working well, getting things done,
Yeah,
being
exactly.
being productive, and I know if I go outside, it'll be a fun couple of hours, but then it'll be like
Yeah.
2 days of, like, slowly
Yep,
ramping back up."
yep,
Hopefully, we'll get some rain, and that'll start to subside soon as well too. So,
yeah.
again, appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Troy.
Awesome, everyone. Hope you have a wonderful day.